Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming this morning. It's not my phone. Let me make sure I silence my own as I'm doing this. I'm Alden Gordon. I'm the Rather Professor of Art History. And see, there are a couple of people still coming in. And so the idea today was to get you together in one of the most important historic buildings on the campus so that you can see the advantage of taking care of old buildings and in particular, the advantages of building good buildings in the first place. So that's a kind of constant motif when you're dealing with campus planning. Come on in. We got just a few people arriving. So while we're doing the preliminaries, I'm showing you a website called Public Art CT that I hope you all will log on to. And this is what's called an interactive website, a responsive website that I created a few years ago as a kind of living catalog of outdoor sculpture and architecture and landscape design, initially in Greater Hartford, but the website is now about to become statewide. So we're going to ramp it up, and it's been created to be used as a teaching tool because I have my undergraduates do research for new entries and fly drones to take pictures and do photography. And it turned out to be an especially valuable digital humanities tool to have available during the pandemic because I could have the students work remotely and and use this as a template for research. So even though the students were scattered by the pandemic to India and China and Australia, and they weren't actually writing entries about things in Connecticut, they could use this as a model and discover buildings wherever they were, or works of art. And it was actually a kind of creative exercise. So, so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is the 1823 Campus Master Plan, which was very important for shaping the Main Quadrangle as you know it today. And a very positive thing that is happening now is that the college is exploring for the first time seeking national landmark status for the Main Quadrangle. It was given Connecticut state landmark status 30 years ago. So this is something that's going on. And it's just been announced that the campus is declaring itself an arboretum. For those of you who were here in the 1990s, and Scott Reynolds is here, who was one of my principal collaborators when I was working on the campus master plan, we commissioned at that point an entire survey of every tree on the campus as just an auxiliary study. So the groundwork was laid long ago to be able to treat the campus as an arboretum. So I'm going to talk to you about the 1823 plan, but I'm going to refer back and forth to this website. And just to show you how it would work, the website allows you, if you tell it, you allow it to see where your location is on your phone, it will try and tell you what's near you. And the website is designed so that you can search for things either by the artist creator, which is this little tab down here. You can browse through all the artworks like an exhibition catalog, or they're prearranged tours. And when you are sophisticated at this, you can make selections of characteristics about what you want to see, and you can design your own tours. So it's an enormously flexible website, and I think pretty cleverly designed. And in particular, this is designed to survey everything from New Britain, East Hartford, Hartford, West Hartford, basically greater Hartford right now. But built into the Public Art CT is a very elaborate tour of Trinity College. So I'm showing you the homepage of the tour. So we're under the Tours tab. So if you want to do this yourself, using the website to design your own tour, you go to the Tours tab and look for the Trinity College tour. And there's this scrolling screen that just kind of whet your appetite for what is out there. But the secret is to go down here, and here you can see all the stops on the Trinity tour. So right now we have 20 things which are cataloged, and you can zoom in on the map and see, you can start anywhere. So in other words, I actually recommend that you start with stop number 20, because that is the page that tells you the history of the campus, the original campus. So we'll return to this in a minute. And so I'm going to show you a few things about the things that Trinity College did, especially at its centennial. So come on in, there's plenty of seats. There's seats down here in front. So I particularly thought that because we're celebrating the bicentennial right now, there was nothing on the program that was actually about what had happened at the previous centennial. And I did some research in the Watkinson Library, and I had been working on the website. And the master plan that was created in 1923 by Remsen Ogilvy, who was the new president, relatively new president of the college at the time, was fundamentally important in defining the campus, the Main Quadrangle as we know it today. And it's a story which is very little known to most people. So I thought it would be worth spending a couple of minutes today to look at this plan. And of course, it begs the question of what a new master plan that might be created in 2024 or after might aspire to do. Trinity College at this campus has only ever had 3 master plans. It had the original plan by William Burgess, which I'll show you in a second, which was never fully built. It had the 1923 plan, which I'm going to talk to you about. And then it had the 1996 Cooper Robertson master plan, which should be the current operative plan, but I'm not sure how many people Scott's got his copy right there. That's, by the way, these are rare and collector's items, and they're sought out by architects and architecture students because this plan won a national award. And it's considered one of the most complete and successful master plans. And I don't think there's a trustee on the board today who's ever read it or knows about it. So anyway, I'm hoping that they'll take an interest and sell yours for a lot, Scott. So, well, some did, but there's a stash of them in my office. So today we're going to talk about the 1823 plan, and to have you fully understand that. So I explained to you. This is the original campus master plan of 1874. So, you know, the campus had been downtown from 1823 until the mid 1870s. And that was the downtown campus. And then when Trinity agreed to sell its downtown campus and acquired this campus, they acquired this land. And the correct name of this campus is the Rocky Ridge campus. For some reason, this usage has crept in to call it the Summit campus, but it was never known as that. It's actually the Rocky Ridge campus. And, you know, William Burgess was an architect in London. He never came to the United States, so he had never physically seen the site. And he trained a lieutenant, Francis Kimball, who was actually the site architect who adapted this plan both to the physical realities of the site, but also to the financial capacity of the college at the time, which couldn't afford to build out this 4-quadrangle plan that you see here. So while this was the aspiration, this campus that you see here was never a reality. But there are a couple of things I want you to notice about this plan because I'll refer back to it. First off, what Kimball had explained to Burgess is that the campus is going to be sited on one of the highest ridges in Connecticut. And this site where we are is a geological phenomenon left over from the Ice Age, where the glacier scraped up all the rock from what was, you know, the Farmington River Valley on this side and the Connecticut River Valley on that side. And when the ice stopped, this ridge was like the bulldozer in front of it, and all the good soil was deposited over in the Farmington River Valley, which became the Tobacco Valley, sort of. So this site is very odd, and Burgess and Kimball understood that they had to respect this geological north-south structure. So the campus in this image on the right-hand side is where Summit Street would eventually be. So this is the high ground. And you see they originally envisioned putting the bishop's statue out here. And then the land sloped away to the east that way across the valley to the Connecticut River. And in the 1870s, this was extremely rural out here. There were, you know, a few farms and some local homesteads, but the area developed very quickly because Connecticut, Hartford was quite industrialized down toward the river. And so it became a blue collar area for housing for people who worked in the typewriter industry and in the firearms industries that were significant here. So remember this north-south orientation on the ridge, because we're going to talk about this over and over again. Now, this is actually what the original Trinity campus looked like. So after Kimball had massaged these plans and taken into account that the college couldn't afford to build the whole thing, this is what the campus looked like in 1888. So Jarvis, which is the closest building to you in this photograph, is on the right, and all of this is Jarvis, and this is all residential. And then the centerpiece, Northam, which is the last building built, was 1881. And then the southern part is the building we're in right now, is Seabury Hall. So this kind of architecture where you line up all of the programmatic elements and you put them end to end is called a bar building. So it's a long bar-like thing. And this was appropriate to keep the architecture lined up with the north-south ridge. So this becomes a principle in building on this site, that you stay close to the high ground and orient the buildings north-south. And I'm going to show you what happens when you forget about them. So you see that it was very rustic. Notice, by the way, since we talked about an arboretum, there are no trees in the quad at this point. So there was no landscape plan. I'll show you when that's introduced. You see that the end of Jarvis is a flat wall. So it was kind of inviting eventually that there would be other component pieces plugged in. And you see that it's a dirt road that leads up from Vernon Street. There was no Summit Street at this point. And this website, I mean, this location, this rocky ridge, is described in guidebooks of the 1850s and 1860s to tell people that when you have to take this arduous drive to go from Hartford out to Farmington, you should pack a lunch and stop up here because the views are spectacular, especially the sunsets looking west over the Farmington River Valley. So when you're on this ridge, you can see all the way across the Connecticut River Valley to the east and all the way west across the Farmington River Valley. So this is very much what the campus looked like, and it was pretty austere up here. And the student body was small. So growth in student body size is another one of these leitmotifs that we'll see. Now, this is what the campus looked like in 1907. This is a photograph from over the rocks. And the site gets its name because there was a quarry down there. And even by 1874, when the college acquired it, the quarry was exhausted. And so they just walked away from the quarry. And this is what it looked like. This photograph is taken from a site further south than where we are now, where there's now a public baseball diamond and things over the rocks. And in the distance here, you see that's the Long Walk. That's Northam sticking up right there. And then this is the beginnings, I think, of Jarvis Hall, which was the physics building. And notice that there is not a tree anywhere on that ridge. And I remember when I came here as a freshman in 1965, there was almost no greenery on the rocks even then. And it was where the geology course was taught. People would scramble down, over the rocks. And I frankly think one of the things that could be done in the third century is to manage all that growth out in there, because it's become a place to hide and sort of, things like that. And since we're an arboretum, maybe we could get serious about what's really planted out there instead of letting just sort of volunteer growth come up. But so it's interesting to see that by the time the college had its first centennial in 1923, what was actually here was very bare bones. So this is a view of the campus from around 1900, looking, from approximately where Williams Memorial is today. So you still see the dirt road. This was the way you arrived. You came up Vernon Street, and along this dirt road, there was a wooden plank sidewalk here and a fence. And we can date this photograph in three ways. First off, the flagpole is there. So we know when the flagpole went in, around 1901, but could be earlier. And there was electricity. So you see these electric poles run right straight across the quad. And the third thing that you can see is that the first landscape plan has been put together. And the landscape plan called for a T-shaped plantation of elm trees, okay? hence the anthem. And we should respect that and go back to the T-shaped plan. So what it called for was a double alley of trees centered on the north that marched parallel to the Long Walk buildings. So there were an alley you could walk through the center of it, and then the sidewalk of the Long Walk was further to the right. And those of you who were here before the 1990s will remember the original Long Walk pavement was extremely narrow and was very close to the building. So in the wintertime, you were very likely to be hit by slush and ice falling off the roof. So one of the things that in the later master plan, we moved, the sidewalk got to be much larger and moved a little bit away from the buildings. And then centered on Northam, the long arm of the T, was meant to be to reach out toward the statue of Bishop Brownell, which is placed where it is there on a big mound. And as the trees approached the bishop statue, they swelled out and sort of made a kind of base. But the plantation of trees also continued down on the lower fields. And I'll show you, how that was supposed to work too. No, Olmsted advised the college. But I think the big influence on the landscape plan here was a man named Jacob Weidenman, who was Olmsted's assistant. And Weidenman was the landscape architect of Bushnell Park. And Bushnell Park was designed before Olmsted designed Central Park. But New York raised more money and actually built Central Park before. But we're talking about starting in the 1850s, then the Civil War intervenes. And I'll show you one picture of the Weidenman plan of the old campus from just after the Civil War. So a couple of things happened in the 1890s, and these represent a continuing pattern in Trinity's history. Trinity has a plan, and then it has amnesia that it has a plan. And so the duration of the amnesia is what you kind of want to track. So and usually those moments happen when there's not enough money and everybody falls into the pattern of believing that you can save money by not building to a plan. But the historical evidence seems to indicate that if you build without a land use plan, you end up making mistakes which are much more expensive to fix later. So we can talk about that. So these two buildings were built as kind of one-offs. Actually, they were both pretty high quality buildings. One of them was designed by Josiah Cleveland Cady, who was the architect of the New York Historical Society. Is that right? Museum of Natural History. And he was also the architect of the St. Anthony Hall building here. And he's an alumnus of the college, so all of his papers are in the Watkinson Library. But these buildings were kind of just plopped down. And I mean, I still took classes in Boardman Hall, which was a very beautiful building inside. And you see the woodwork of this room. Boardman had very beautiful paneling and cases, and alas, none of it was preserved. Now, this is the Weidenman plan that I just mentioned to you. This is a detail of Jacob Weidenman's plan of downtown Hartford in 1864. So this is right at the end of the Civil War. People are coming back. The North is one. All of the industries in New England are poised to make a lot of money. And this is when Weidenman designed this, find my cursor here. So this is the Park River winding through downtown Hartford. And this is Trinity College, the first campus. And you see it was on the ridge. It's actually the same spur of the ridge. And it's lined up north-south. it was built in a neoclassical style. The statue of Bishop Brownell was in this grove of trees. But the really important thing you must take away from this plan is that the relationship between the campus up here on top of this hill with the surrounding landscape architectural plan that Weideman created for Bushnell Park was that the college looked out and down on a man-made thing that was supposed to represent New England pastures. You were supposed to feel like you were in Vermont, you know, that you were in a very rural place, even in the city. And so do not forget this image, because this was deep in the memory of the trustees when they moved to this campus. And I'll show you how this idea gets translated here. And of course, the other things were, this was the new train station over here, and just across the river from the Trinity campus was the Sharps rifle factory. So in other words, all this, you know, it wasn't just Colt, there were 5 or 6 armories here, so that, you know, Hartford was booming. Sorry? Yeah, which was very important to win the Civil War, right? So, so this is an aerial view, and fortunately, there were a lot of aerial photographs taken of the campus in the 20th century, so we have pretty good documentation. So I wanted to show you this one, which we think is from about 1920. So you can clearly see the trees are more mature, and you see this T-shaped thing. So the bishop is out in here, and there's this double alley of trees that's as long as the bar building over here. Then you have Boardman and Jarvis over here on the right, which, you know, were built actually significantly further south than the main building. So there was a lot of land left in here. Some of us will remember Alumni Gymnasium, you see, which was over here, which burned down the summer that I was before my sophomore year with all my furniture. So Alumni Gymnasium sat so that you entered from the chapel level, but when you went out to the playing fields, you went down and out. So I kept that idea in my mind. So when we were working, as Scott will remember this, on the Cooper-Robertson plan, that's where we put the new admissions building, on the site of the old Alumni Gymnasium, to imitate exactly that you had one main entrance at the level of the chapel, you had this spectacular view of the playing fields, and then you could exit also and have an entrance down at both levels. So that was, you know, a kind of gesture to an old Alumni Gymnasium and my incinerated furniture from the past. So this is pretty much the original building, but you'll notice a very important addition has been made over here at the north. And this was the contribution of J.P. Morgan, who wanted to who was a trustee of Trinity, but hadn't gone to Trinity, but who had grown up in Hartford, and his father and all of his family are buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery, which is, by the way, a landscape plan of Jacob Wyden, the same landscape architect. And Morgan gave this building because the college was in desperate need of a library. That was the principal reason. So when Seabury had been built, it had all of the academic functions. This room we're in now was the chapel. And the library was, you know, further over in the building. So for, you know, the first 50 years, this was the chapel and the library was here. So Morgan gave the Williams Memorial Building, and they already had the idea before the First World War that they had to make this connection to the Long Walk. And they had very significantly decided it was going to be a right angle connection, attached to the end. And they created the Jarvis Arch down there. And go into the Jarvis Arch and look, it's a cutting edge piece of architecture because it uses the latest fireproofing technology, which is called the Guastavino vault. It's a kind of ceramic tile that is to be fire retardant, and it was used very heavily all over the Yale campus. So our buildings are pure Gothic revival 19th century, the ones we're in. Yale is fake Gothic, you see. It's built in the 20th century. But it was built about the time that Williams Memorial was. So look at the ceiling in that arch. So this was essentially the problem, and the opportunities that were presented to Remsen Ogilvy when he was hired to come to Trinity as president in 1920 about. And he was coming up on the college's centennial. So that's the setting for this. So notice here that the primary structure is in place. Long bar building, north-south, right on the ridge, and with these views in both directions. But look in particular at how Kimball had translated the concept from downtown, is that they took all of the rubble when they excavated the foundations of Jarvis, Seabury, and Northam, and they used it to fill this area because otherwise the land slopes off the way the Mather Quad does. And so they terraced this space. So they already had this idea that this part was going to stay flat. And that when you were up here on the quad, you looked down at these New England pastures. That was the idea, you see. So that even though the city was going to build up around it, it was as though you were in this beautiful rural place. And in fact, if you looked west, it was kind of romantic because there were these cliffs. So it's a perfect expression of romantic revival, Gothic architecture. Couldn't be better unless the North Sea were breaking where Zion Street is, you see, because then you would have this, Gothic monastery on a hill kind of architecture. Another thing worth looking at in this photograph is that there was ways that you could drive in. You see, this is a road here that goes all the way down to Broad Street. It comes up and it turned so that you could communicate across right under the brow of the hill. And then very, very importantly out here, so the Institute for Living is, a block away. But between the Institute for Living and Trinity are these buildings. You see these industrial buildings right here? These are the Connecticut bus and trolley companies' bus barns. And so the tram cars, this is where they came at night to be serviced. And for 150 years, when they changed the oil on every bus and every tram, they let the oil run out on the ground in that place right there. And so the big issue, I'm not going to really deal with this today, that we were confronting, and primarily under the leadership of Alfred Coppell, who was the chairman of the board in the 1990s, was dealing with the problem of the old bus garage. Because it was a brownfield site, it had become very deteriorated, and lots of socially inappropriate behavior happened there. And so that became the kind of nugget of the problem which the 1996 campus plan was set to address. So that was far in the future for what we're talking about today. So these aerial views are very helpful to us because you can you get a sense now. Summit Street has been paved at this point, but you see that there are trees all around the west side of Northam, and you should remember that Northam was closed. There were doors on Northam, and it was not an entryway to the quad. So that was another thing that we corrected in the late 90s. And having opened the Northam Arch, it is today the most photographed place on the campus. And most people think it was always like that. But it was not, because you didn't actually arrive at the campus from the Summit Street side. You came up from Vernon Street to like this. So, so this is the Williams Memorial Building given by J.P. Morgan, 1913-14. It was finished. The big window that you see at the end, that was the new library. The president's office is where it is still down here. And the doorway leading into Williams lined up with the Long Walk. Now, you see this end of this building is finished in brownstone. Remember that? See the little Model T parked back here. So there's no, this was the principal driveway to the campus. You came from Vernon Street up to there. So remember this gap here, the gap between the Williams Memorial and where the chapel is going to be. Okay, that's a significant thing because it has to be mirrored at the other end of the quad. So notice that this building is built in Connecticut brownstone, Portland brownstone, and it has Indiana limestone trim. So that's the same materials that are used in the Long Walk. Okay, so those are the traditional materials. So now the Summit Street side, this is a rare photograph that shows you Williams Memorial. So here is the Jarvis Arch with this cutting edge Guastavino fireproofing in it. This was the administrative, buildings that supported the library that connected to the Long Walk by extending the Long Walk, you see, staying on the ridge and creating this first 90-degree turn. And this is what the library looked like. Just thought for fun you would like to see. And this room has the same kind of hammer beam ceiling that you see in the Long Walk buildings. It's still a very beautiful room, but it's kind of gutted at this point. And so I think this room has huge potential to be used for other kinds of things. And then you see the door to the president's office and the door that led up to the stairs to go to the library. So, and you see that the gap is still here. So we know this photograph couldn't be, it's about 1920. So now this is a quick overview of the steps in the history of the campus. So there's that Burgess plan that was never built, 3 or 4 quadrangles. This is what was really built in 1881. This is, about the 1900 version. And so you see that Alumni Gymnasium has appeared here. I don't think I want that. And the president's house. And then about 1920, as we come up to the Centennial, you had the Long Walk buildings with the addition of Williams right there. Playing fields open, Boardman and Jarvis over here. So what we're going to focus on now is this design here, which is the 1923 Trowbridge and Livingston plan, which was the most important in the history of the college. And then this this image represents as much as Remsen Ogilvy could build before World War II. So you had from 1923, didn't know World War II was coming, right? But had the Depression, and then you know, the Second World War changes, all of that kind of stops. And then these images are what happens when you come back from war and you've forgotten you had a plan, right? So you can see the kind of scattered location. So there are two kinds of campus planning. The most fundamental is called land use planning, see? So that's not where you're designing buildings. You're just saying, if you need this kind of a building, you put it here, you know, and it should be about this size and about this tall. And then, you know, there's the other level where you choose an architect, and you say, build it here, you know, this tall, and accomplish this program, see? And if you do that correctly, you get triple bang for every dollar you spend, you see, because you're not only accomplishing some purpose that you want to fulfill for the mission of the institution, you're building in the right place, so you're you know, having something happen for your campus, which is greater. And if you've chosen a good architect and you got a really beautiful building, then you've aesthetically improved the life of all the people who ever use it, see? So it's more uplifting to come to a lecture in a space like this than in a cinder block. So, you know, so you know, that's why planning is a good investment long term. Now, this is the Trowbridge and Livingston Centennial Plan. And there are blueprints of it, which are hard to read. But the essential thing is that here's the Long Walk buildings. You see Williams Memorial, and the Trowbridge plan said, if you're going to have a chapel, put it here, you see. Now, Trowbridge thought that if there were a chapel, it should be French flamboyant Gothic. And it should be relatively small, truly a chapel, because the main buildings by Burgess are actually Romanesque revival. But critically important is you see at this end, there was going to be another quadrangle. And this quadrangle was going to have not an arcade leading to the chapel, but residence halls. So remember this building that's a kind of L-shaped thing here. You're going to see that reappear later. Then the centerpiece, because this was the principal driveway of the college, was an archway that's on axis with the center of the campus. And at the opposite end, the south, there was another gap, you see. And in this gap, you were supposed to create yet another quadrangle on the south. So it gave you an extremely rational way to extend the Long Walk, stay on the ridge, and have lots of footprints for additional building. And the Trowbridge and Livingston plan called for some kind of an academic building out here, which later became the Clement Chemistry Laboratory. And then you have Trowbridge and Livingston still including Boardman and Jarvis, you know, which were just now embraced by this new quadrangle, but had now become an obstacle in this place. And the college also wanted new athletic facilities. And so this was going to be the swimming pool with squash courts on top. So that was the basic essence of the Trowbridge and Livingston plan. You notice that they show no trees on this plan because the tree plantation was already there and they wanted to be sure you could see the buildings. So they weren't really doing a landscape plan. But this is the most important plan because the Trowbridge plan guaranteed for the future, if you remembered, that the main quadrangle at Trinity College would never actually be a quadrangle. It would remain an open U, you see. And the reason it had to be an open U was why? You had to be able to see those playing fields. You had to have that view to this New England pasture. So that's what makes the Trinity campus unlike other college campuses. That's why this is worthy of being a national landmark. So here are the two basic plans. this is what Trowbridge called for on the left, with quadrangles at north and south, with lots of new opportunities to build. There's the view out to the playing fields. And this is as far as Ogilvy got by 1940. So they added this range of buildings on the south, and they built the chapel over here. So this is still before the Second World War. Alumni gym is still there. And this thing down here is the brand new first thing they built, the Trowbridge swimming pool. And of course, Trowbridge and Livingston, Trowbridge was the designer and donor, toward the building of the pool, which was the first thing that's built. The pool itself is still there underneath the floor of a recreation room, but the old squash courts are still up there someplace. So now we're going to take a rapid survey of what Ogilvy actually did. And this is Remsen Ogilvy in the center, talking to Philip Frohman, who's the architect of the chapel, and a couple of the people working. And you can see that the chapel is already under construction here. And I don't have time today to go into detail about all these buildings, but notice that the chapel is actually a 20th century international style building. I mean, it's built with reinforced concrete and brick, and the Gothic appearance is a veneer. So everything that's carved, that's not what's holding the building up. So it's not a load-bearing wall building. This building, built in the 1880s, is still a load-bearing wall building, say. But the chapel, all these new buildings, they're modern, they're 20th century buildings using steel. And you see by their feet, you see these are reinforcing rods sticking up from the concrete. So it's concrete building. And so at the bottom, I listed the principal buildings. This is a lot of building in a fairly short time during the Depression, part of it. So it turns out that another thing that's worth mentioning is the trustees and Ogilvy were incredibly, first off, continued to be generous and supportive in spite of the crash. But it turned out that Ogilvy was a kind of genius at managing the college's investments. And so when the stock market was down, he was buying, Union Pacific, and so, this is how they were able to keep these construction projects going, largely owing to Martin Clement, who was the chairman of the board. So here's the Trowbridge pool with the squash courts on top. So the importance of squash, has this old history here. I mean, in the old days, we all had to take our swimming test in this pool because everybody had to be able to climb the rope and swim a mile or whatever it was. And then the chapel was very important to Ogilvy himself. But when Ogilvy decided to build a chapel, and he went to Philip Frohman, the architect who would later design Washington National Cathedral. So the Trinity Chapel is like a test run of Washington National Cathedral, small. But the Trinity Chapel is far larger than Trowbridge indicated it should be. And in fact, if you look at it, the Trinity College Chapel as built is an enormous building which dwarfs the Long Walk buildings. Its scale is very big, and it's a big white limestone building. You see, whereas Trowbridge said it should be brownstone with limestone trim. So that's a place where you can sort of see Ogilvy expressing, his particular interpretation of how this should be done. And so the college owns the blueprints. The Watkinson Library has all of this material. But I showed you this one photograph because I wanted you to see that the chapel is built with steel. It's a 20th century building, built like the Chrysler building. And of course, here you can see the steel cage rising up to hold the weight of the carillon. So it's basically a modern building with a veneer And that's part of the problem, is the water gets in between the structural steel and the veneer, and the only way to get in there is to take the veneer off. So that's a different problem. So here's a view of the, the footings of the chapel. It gives you a chance to look out toward the bus garage. There's the alumni gymnasium. But this project went very fast, considering the designs were made in 1928. They broke ground in 1930, and the building was pretty much completed by 1932. And then a lot of the carving and all the other, and of course the carving of the pew ends and everything like that inside, the stained glass that goes out into the 50s, to furnish it out. But so this is the construction. So you see cement footings. This is the view of the roof as it's being finished. So, I mean, what's admirable in these images is you see all these stonemasons, these carvers, who, I mean, all of these are traditionally carved stone ornaments. And then you see the view out, and here's this, the New England pasture is right there at the brow of the hill. And there's the bus barns back there in the distance. So, by, about, 1935, the chapel is there, and you see how big it is, really, compared to the scale of this. And you have the gap where there's possibility for new work. And then they engage McKim, Mead, and White to be the architects of the South Range over here. And the lead architect was James Kellum Smith. So if you can go to the Public Art CT, you'll find a biography of James Kellum Smith, and you can see the history of each of the buildings. And so Smith's response was that they should build another bar building. It's a long, straight building. And it had a couple of components. This extension is Hamlin Hall. So the college had not had a dining hall for the undergraduates. The reason Trinity College evolved with fraternities was that the college outsourced, feeding the students to the fraternities in houses over there. So building Hamlin Hall meant that the whole student body would actually have a dining hall. Then the college needed modern science buildings, and Martin Clement was very keen on this. So the building is actually named for Martin Clement. So you had the Clement Chemistry Building built here. There's Trowbridge Pool down there. And then this critical gap, you see, should have been left right here where the Goodwin dormitory is. So something happens about 1938 that makes them decide, they're going to build this building, I think, because they had the money in hand. So what remains of the gap is the Goodwin Arch, which is a relatively small arch, but it's in the right alignment. So it's very important as Trinity goes forward that it not plant trees to block the line that connects the Goodwin Arch to the Downs clock tower. So they built Cook with the commons being Hamlin Hall. And you see there's an unfinished dormer here. That was where the quads were going to be built out to the south. And then you had a academic building. So you had Goodwin Dorm, Woodward, Cook, and Hamlin. So this was all part of a strategy that Ogilvy had to increase the student body. So Trinity had traditionally been a lot of students who lived at home. And so the goal was to have an improved student body, which meant that you recruited from all over the country. So, but the student body was still quite small, really. So remember, this is what was presented to McKim, Mead, and White. You've got this long bar building with this end where Seabury ends, this is where he makes the connection, you see, right here. And so there were a couple of windows that are obscured in the end of Seabury, but this is where it makes a right turn, and this establishes forever the open U. You see that you're not going to build back into and block that view. So this is what the McKim-Mead White contribution adds. Now, what this looked like early on. So here's Hamlin Hall, and so Hamlin Hall actually had windows in it, and this building is right on the ridge. And there was this. You see, this dormer is plaster because this was supposed to be blown out, and this is where you'd connect a long building that would come down this way, so that you'd have lots of housing back here with a little subordinate green. The difference is that the McKim-Mead White buildings do not have Indiana limestone trim. So it's the same Portland brownstone, but the window lintels and everything are also in brownstone. But you know, it respected the idea and continued it. So for a short time, there was a gap left between Cook Dormitory and the chemistry building on the right. So this photograph is kind of significant for me because it shows this view through the gap next to Williams. And so, you know, this was the real Trowbridge and Livingston idea, that you'd have 3 quadrangles now along the hill. So a north-south orientation. Now, eventually, this is filled in by the Goodwin Dormitory, and that line is left now represented only by the archway. So here's an aerial view taken recently. So my student assistants are here. Jeff Pendergast is my drone pilot now, and Sarah Bello is my editorial assistant. So we have a very small staff. But generous support from the Stroud Foundation for doing this. So what you see in this photograph, this is basically what Trinity wants to landmark now. So this is the Trowbridge piece, and there are 2 others. The one part of this which is in the envelope of the landmark status is the Downs Arch, which is the only piece of this that was built after the Second World War. And fortunately, the architect for that looked back at the Trowbridge plan. And then there is one fugitive piece of what would have been the dormitories behind the chapel. And that, so here's the Goodwin Arch, which is on the right line, you see. And don't look at all that. Yeah. And the other piece, so in other words, there was supposed to be the quadrangle here with an archway, and 1940 is coming, and Europe is at war, right? And Martin Clement and others step forward and say, well, we want to build another dormitory for you. And it really should have gone here. But they had purchased this corner lot up here. And Ogilvy said, I've got the building plans for that, you know. But instead of building it here, it was built over here. And this becomes the Ogilvy dormitory. And you notice that this dormitory has it's a corner. It's just like a fragment of a building, because I think it's the fragment of what was supposed to be plugged into the Downs Arch, you see, to create that north quadrangle. And so the concept was that because the money was coming from people who had been members of St. Anthony Hall, that the St. Anthony Hall would have the use of this entryway, which included the dining room. This entryway was for faculty members and visiting dignitaries. And this entryway was for students, you know, all students of the college. That was always in the gift was the concept. So there's a sort of myth that the building was built only for the hall, but in fact, it was always 1/3 faculty, distinguished visitors, 1/3 general college, 1/3 hall. So that building was built and completed in 1941. I mean, just before Pearl Harbor. And so this is what it looked like. And I think that it is the recollection of one of these buildings you see here, where it just fit into this corner, but it always felt to me like it was only part of a building, you see. So I'll just, in the last minute, I'll show you how they address the gap at the north side. So here's the gap left between Williams and the chapel. And so this is the principal driveway. You know, the dean lived over here, and the president's house was down there, now the English department. So there you see St. Anthony Hall. That's where the Ogilvy would be built in there. And this is actually the blueprints of the Livingston plan. I think it's too hard for you to see. But here's the Long Walk buildings. Here's the gap between the chapel. But you see, Livingston had set a small chapel, and the college built an enormous chapel. But the space is, the chapel was actually built, you know, back here. And then there was supposed to be a lawn. This is the principal arrival point. There's the old gymnasium still indicated there, but with now more housing being built up and down Vernon Street. So the idea was still that you arrive from Vernon Street and came in here, and that was how you got to the front door of the college. It's also interesting that you see you could come in from Broad Street. There's a roadway that links you to Vernon Street and goes up to Summit Street. And there was a skating pond, faculty tennis courts, a faculty clubhouse. And then there were student tennis courts right here, and that's under the brow of the hill, sort of where the lower lawn is now. This is land use planning thing. So this is finally the Downs Arch, which was built right after the Second World War, designed, you know, conceived, and it made one addition that was unwelcome, is that it introduced the use of brick, which is inconsistent with the Long Walk. The Long Walk should be brownstone and limestone. But, you know, it imitates a building in Dublin, and, you know, which has associations, and it's in the right place. See? It's in the right place on axis with the gap. So in other words, if Ogilvy had been built right here, you see, that would sort of had been the plan. And so this is the arrival side. The trustees meeting room was up here. So basically this is the landmark campus, you know, what came as a result of good planning in 1823, realized out to at least as far as 1950, 57. However, other things were happening at the college in the 1950s, where they were not using a land use plan. And so I'll leave you here with the image of, is that Elton Hall? Elton Hall there, which was, you see, exactly. So in other words, Elton is the sort of indicator of what happens when you forgot you had a plan. See? And so this is the campus as it looked in the 1980s, where buildings are being dropped like this. So this is a subject for another time. But you know, this is when you go into a well-designed piece of landscape architecture, you're unaware of it because you have this sense of bien-être, you know, sort of well-being. And so the design is invisible to you. When you go into a badly or not designed, so you have this sense of being ill at ease and irritated, and then the lack of design becomes conspicuous. So it's an important thing in any case. And you see the difference on the right-hand side, the regularity, the evenness of the Livingston, Trowbridge and Livingston plan built onto the Burgess plan, and then you have this sense of confusion. Where's the front door? How do I get from this part to another part? And so this is my case for why planning is important. So I hope you'll use the Public Art CT website, take a tour of the campus, and if anybody wants to take a walk with me right now, I can give you the personal version of that. Anybody have any questions? I've used up all my time. But... Sorry, when was that movie supposed to 1976 or so? Yeah. Well, so a lot of people hate the life sciences building. There are actually several other buildings which are better candidates for demolition. And in fact, life sciences is, even though it's a building that's easy to dislike, it's not a bad example of its kind, but if Trinity wants to sort of start to correct the errors of the post-war planning, the first, what Trinity still lacks is the main entrance off of New Britain Avenue, and it needs building spaces. So my top candidates would be McCook and Alden Engineering, and that but also buildings like the Austin Art Center now has no elevator in it. It's an art building without it. So no, so yep.
Now, the student you wrote that
yeah, speak up so I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I did. I did. Yeah. 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 So that was based on the knowledge of this plan. So I mean, this plan has many very viable things in it. So it could still be, resurrected, but it would have to be updated because some things have happened which have foreclosed some of the options in this. But it's most important that they actually plan at all, which means you have to have a trustee physical plan committee and a faculty design review committee. And those two things don't exist. Well, who was? Oh, Carnarvon Castle. Yeah, in Wales. He was a very important Victorian architect. He built the principal law courts building in London. Yeah. But I mean, this is his only building in North America, in the Western Hemisphere. So, Stuart, how are you?